best friend's younger sister was died a decent burial for 2 days. 'Cause that's a flame the island with.
You are listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, Greg talks to two guests about Albright Monument, Baghdad, track number 7 on Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. Greg's first guest is the 4th appearance of Dr. Chris Deutsch, who you may remember from our Cop Just Out of Frame, People's History of the World, and Purina Hall of Fame episodes. Chris and Greg talked about the history of Iraq in the 1980s and the 1990s, the sanctioning of Iraq in the years after the first Gulf War, and then they do a deep dive on the intense themes and ideas found within the song. Then Greg welcomes Tim Browne from the band Elway back to the podcast. Tim appeared on the Lotus Gate episode, which was one that Greg and I both really loved. Tim and Greg discuss the Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes reissue, and then do another deep dive into the song. Both of these conversations were great, and we're really grateful to both Chris and Tim for participating on the podcast repeatedly. But before we kick off those interviews, let's start this episode with an acoustic cover performed by friend of the podcast, Elliot Imes. Greg and I will be back for part 2 of Albright Monument, Baghdad in the coming months. And as always, thank you so much for listening.
His best friend's younger sister was denied a decent burial, 'cause for 2 days they couldn't dust the flames. The alley flames were showered on her tiny body, and all the paper trails that lead to all the roads that lead to all these past scenes were all just collateral damage waiting to be happened. And it's some unforeseen fucking Pentagon budget drill, today's bath regime, just the red scare of yesteryear. And I drink myself to sleep 'cause I'm losing faith. That we can amount to anything more than reluctant human subsidies, the moving parts in a death machine, protesting their complicity, but waiting for somebody else to throw their bodies on the churning gears. I drink myself to sleep because I'm losing faith that we're in the cradle of affluence can cease, a sickening drive for individual strength through state-powered swinging fists, or that will never look back and laugh at the irony that is an atomic murderers enshrine in Independence, USA, while 8,000 miles from here, in the cradle of democracy, it's just another better year. For a cottage industry, a ritual at the corner of George and Constantine, as founders scramble to recast his decapitated monument.
Fucking Pentagon budget drill, today's bad regime. Just the red scare of yesteryear. And I drink myself to sleep because I'm losing faith.
Chris Deutsch, welcome back for the fourth time, by my latest count, to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me back.
Chris, it's a delight to have you here. And just as a recap out there for anybody listening, if they haven't heard your appearances on the other episodes, you appeared in Cop Just Out of Frame, which, I don't know if you know this, is the most downloaded episode of this podcast that exists. So a lot of people out there will be familiar with some of your commentary with regards to the band themselves and their songs, but also a lot of the issues that inform a lot of the lyrics that go into the band. And then you were also on our Purina Hall of Fame episode and our People's History episode. So it's a delight to have you back for the fourth time. And I'm pretty sure, based on some other conversations you and I've had recently, that you'll be back for another appearance in the near future as well. Oh, and this is Chris the Cat, so you get to meet him. So Chris, how have things been since the last time you've been on the podcast? What have you been up to? How's work going? And just catch me up on what you've been up to since you were here last.
Yeah, so I'm still a teaching postdoctorate at a position at the University of Missouri in the history department. So most of my time is spent teaching and researching and writing and working on a book on the history of beef, meat production and policy in United States after World War II, particularly exploring how come Americans really wanted beef, or really what they did to make sure that they got the meat that they demanded.
Mm-hmm.
And I know many people would be surprised to hear this, but when beef prices would rise periodically, particularly in certain points from the 1940s to the 1980s, really by the way people understood what was, what was the right amount of price rising to happen. So when inflation really hit, Americans would kind of lose their mind and get very upset that beef prices rising was kind of a big political deal.
So you're kind of noticing a lot of the things that are in your work happening before our very eyes right now, aren't you?
Yeah, I didn't expect to ever really have to grapple with seeing meat inflation really return as an issue, since it was quickly eclipsed by oil.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of Iraq and U.S. foreign policy, really by the end of the 1970s, in fact, even in one year, Americans start the year very upset about beef prices, but end the year just overwhelmingly upset by oil prices and the inflation of those specific goods. They kind of like trade off as being really important political signifiers of economic degradation of the individual American's place in the economy, the supposed economy of abundance and prosperity, with Americans falling behind, being measured in a singular good that they used to buy, one being initially beef, but by the end of the 70s, it's oil. And so I never thought that I would again see headlines grappling with meat and inflation, but things have a habit of happening that you don't expect.
Yeah. And, I'm just watching this happen every single day. And I watch my own bills and my own spending pretty carefully. And the expenses of just existing in the world right now seem pretty overwhelming. And it's just been really crazy to think about. Are you kind of surprised seeing both of those things happening kind of simultaneously? Because you mentioned they were happening sort of apart in time before, but is it pretty shocking to see it all at once?
Yeah, it's interesting to see at times beef or meat or oil kind of trade off on the headlines, where the energy costs versus food costs trading off is the things that people are kind of really getting upset about.
Mm-hmm.
And the period of time I study, consumers in America have a pretty strong political identity, about as strong as you could hope them to have or imagine them having, given that consumers are atomized individuals in the capitalist economy, bouncing off each other and doing a very isolated economic activity. one-on-one engaging with massive corporations and small businesses and whatnot. And the consumer response back in the before the end of the Cold War was a bit more focused on identifying themselves politically as having economic and political interests wrapped together. And it'll be interesting to see if something can trigger people to more coherently work in their political consumerism into their political identity again. But that's it's a story for a longer book that I'm working on, as far as how that played out with just looking at beef, in addition to looking at it, cattle and slaughterhouses and meat production. I also look at consumer politics.
Well, a lot that we're going to get into here as well also involves, times of war and conflict, which we also have found ourselves sort of thrust back into and within the recent weeks. I mean, are you paying attention to all that, I'm assuming, and thinking about that as well within the context of what's happening over here too?
Yeah, it's an interesting reminder that the Europe of the Cold War is both something that is reflective in today, but it's also something that we kind of, I think most in the United States definitely lost sight of because of Iraq, because of the Middle East, because of particularly the topic that we're going to talk about with Albright Monument Baghdad, the way, and particularly the Clinton administration in the 90s pivoted U.S. foreign policy by the end of the administration to try to even, in some ways, minimize Europe after what happened in Bosnia and his kind of, as he was grappling with a new kind of foreign policy, putting more and more pressure on the Middle East to be the U.S.'s focus of foreign policy, which the following administration would obviously take to an absurd degree by launching multiple wars in the Middle East.
There's so much here too, because, as we were saying earlier, off before we started recording, like a lot of people out there, whenever they think about the term Iraq, they immediately do an association with either George H.W. Bush or George W. Bush, and they often jump entirely over the Clinton years totally. So I'm excited to get into that as well too. I think that that's going to be some fascinating stuff that a lot of people don't really know, because this song was written not during the Bush presidency, most likely. I mean, it didn't come out till February 2001, but it probably predates the Bush presidency by a couple of years, since the pace of Propaganda's songwriting is so unique. But since we last talked, also there has been a reissue of the record in question, Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, which was fixed up by Jason Livermore. And I'm wondering if you have any major observations or, general observations with regards to the reissue, which recently came out to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the record.
Yeah, so I've been able to give it a little bit of a listen. I can't say too much about it other than the sound is a bit richer. It sounds like whatever they were doing behind the scenes, it pulled out more of the subtle tones of the song, and Chris's lyrics are much clearer. Yeah. They sound a lot more like they're breathing more than just mixed into the guitar work.
Gotcha. You were here for the Purine episode, so we did talk about this a little bit on that episode, but let me know again, just kind of refresh my memory on why Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes is kind of a special record within the course of your life in particular. Tell me what's special about this record to you as a whole.
Yeah, it's always fun to think about those albums that you just remember buying. You remember the first time you played it, whether it's a tape, a CD, a record, now a digital file, and all Propaganda albums are that way for me, with like moments of my life, moments of my interest in whatever, whatever's going on in the punk or hardcore scenes or whatever. And Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes hit just like all of theirs did in just the right moment. And I was getting deeper into hardcore music and a harder edged sound and more interest in particular kinds of guitar tones and riffs and stuff, and also hoping to develop more my own understanding of the world, and having a better grasp of what really happens, rather than the kind of stuff I grew up with.
Yeah.
And as Chris explores in all of his songs, it seems there's some element of that. This album just drips with that, in addition to having an entirely new voice to the band, which was an excellent welcomed kind of compliment to the way the album plays out. And yeah, with this album, it kind of felt like I was ready to learn more and go deeper and go harder, and the album did.
Yeah. What were you doing in your life in February of 2001 when this record came out?
It's a good question.
I
remember.
I was in high school. That's all I know.
I was in the military.
Okay, cool. So that kind of ties in here. Let's get into the song here. Albright Monument Baghdad from Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. You know, I can't really remember if I invited you specifically to talk about this song or if this was one that you expressed interest in. How did we wind up here? Because like in the back of my mind, your name has been in my head for months now to do this episode, but how did this happen? Did I invite you or did you or were you like, hey, I really like Albright Monument? I can't remember how this went down.
You probably asked me. I don't remember. Honestly, I don't remember asking.
Okay, cool. So yay, go me. Chris, it's always a pleasure to have you here. That's why I invited you specifically. Tell me a little bit about Albright Monument Baghdad and your opening sort of impression of this song and what this does for you, because then we can sort of dive into the history behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I clearly remember the two tracks that I really always look forward to when I was listening to the album. One was Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, and the other was Albright Monument Baghdad, because they were really powerful explorations of very specific developments that were then playing out and kind of spoke to like I said, I was trying to learn more about the world and engage more with alternative media and alternative understandings than just the stuff I'd grown up with. And one of them, powerful ways to do that was to question the American foreign policy, the general just history and recent past of how the United States acted in the world. And it's kind of hard to recall what it was like when Iraq wasn't invaded by the United States.
Mm-hmm.
When it was just under extreme and vicious sanctions. And this album spoke to that moment. I mean, as it was literally about to end, because like less than 9 months after this album was released, the 9/11 terror attacks absolutely transformed the moment. But this album caught the tail end of a very important kind of vibe, and it did so in a way that was really critical by thinking more deeply about the U.S. relationship with Iraq and with the area and the region, and how the United States defined and particularly justified its actions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the song explores those in ways that were challenging at the time for me, but welcomed.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to know what you know about what the U.S.'s role with Iraq was in the 1990s. Take us pre-Bush and the 2003 invasion. You mentioned a decade of sanctions. Tell me a little bit about what you know about what was happening in Iraq in the 90s.
Absolutely. So it was definitely something I get to teach most semesters. And I try to follow the historical literature on this. So historians are cracking it, and it's definitely an interesting, and it's weird to say this, but a weird time when the logic of the war on terror hadn't yet begun playing out, because the war on terror had been launched. But it's funny you said Bush. I immediately thought Bush Sr.
Okay.
But you were pointing to Bush Jr., who's more important for the more recent developments. But beginning really going back even to the 1970s and beforehand, the United States is getting involved with Iraq in various ways. But what's going to really trigger U.S. involvement with Iraq in a really powerful way is the Iraq-Iran war, where the long story short, it's a very messy story that is the participants who set it up and made it happen are not going to tell us what happened really. So it's going to be historical documents left in presidential archives or other sources that are going to give us the true information. But basically the long short of it is the United States was supporting both Iraq and Iran. United States wanted Iran to not win and wanted Iraq to not win, but wanted particularly Iraq to tie up Iran while trying to topple Iran's government by trading it weapons. So it's a very ugly, brutal war. I don't know too much of the specifics, but what I have read, it was a really gruesome war. Iran is much bigger than Iraq, and Iraq was facing an army that had just more people. So Iraq's technological advantages that kept it in play were driving the United States. Very infamously, the United States sent special envoy Donald Rumsfeld, who in 1983 personally met with the Iraq leader, Saddam Hussein, introducing Americans a little bit to Saddam Hussein for the first time. And after the war ended, without either side really achieving much other than a decade of blood being shed, the United States' relationship with Iraq was a bit in flux, as best I understand it. And then Iraq is trying to rebuild after this long and costly war. Oil prices are very low. The economy is recovering in the United States. So his regime, the Ba'athist regime, his government wanted higher gas prices to pay for rebuilding, and he wanted to also clarify some long disputes with the Kuwaiti government to the south, and he invaded. He did warn the United States he was going to invade beforehand. The United States said what happens between Arab countries is Arab business, and of course Bush immediately pivoted to calling Saddam Hussein Hitler in September. By early September, the Bush administration, with pretty universal press support, portrayed the battle as really being between George Bush and Saddam Hussein as these kind of epic personalities who were locked in this like battle of good versus evil.
Yeah.
With Saddam Hussein being the Hitler evil and George Bush being the goodly democratic Christian American doing the Lord's work to defeat the aggressor. And the Hitler analogy was really important for the Bush administration to make the case that this was about appeasement. And if Saddam Hussein was able to capture and take Kuwait, it would be appeasement. So Bush administration eventually gets a ground war, minimal U.S. combat deaths, 148 or somewhere thereabouts. And this is something that the historian Daniel Besner has recently published on, which I've been reading in preparation for this, is he puts the Gulf War as the centerpiece of launching America's kind of like new post-Cold War vision of itself. And the reason why the Gulf War is important is for policymakers at the time, as he points out, this clear win, clean win, easy win could become a template that proves that the U.S. warfighting systems, very technological, very clean in its own self-image, seen as bloodless, although it certainly wasn't, could then be used anywhere. And this is the new warfighting method. And this brings us into the 90s, where the reason why the United States could be this clean and clear is because it didn't invade Iraq and it didn't bring down Saddam Hussein. So the next administration to take over, Clinton administration, followed up with and continued the Bush administration's follow-up policy through the UN, which was to just sanction Iraq as much as possible.
Sure.
And these sanctions became incredibly controversial. Some governments, like France, did occasionally or completely, or at times would be completely opposed to some elements of the sanctions because of its effects on the Iraqi people. Since, as Russia is also proving right now, sanctions hurt the most vulnerable.
Yeah, for sure.
They can be effective. They can do work as far as like the policymakers' goals are, but there will be a lot of casualties in the meantime. Yeah. And this is where it gets a little sticky and gets very complicated. Yeah. But in the mid 90s, UN reports were starting to suggest that the number of people, particularly children, dying as a direct result of these sanctions were potentially very, very high. As many as like maybe 500,000 children were dying. And this leads to Leslie Stahl, the 60 Minutes correspondent, infamously asking her if these dead children's, again, the UN, this is the UN's initial reporting based on some pretty sketchy information from the Iraq government.
Yeah.
But it was pretty much accepted as possible, if not probable. What she thought about it, and she said in response, Albright says, we think the price is worth it.
Yeah. Oh goodness. I know that like the infrastructure of, Iraq basically collapses post Gulf War, post war with Iran. I know that there's massively deteriorating living conditions, which you were just alluding to, huge inflation, plummeting salaries, food shortages, lack of medication, lack of clean drinking water. So it's just like a humanitarian catastrophe, essentially, is what it sounds like to me. And was there like agreement around the world with the US to sanction Iraq? I know that France pushed back a little bit, but was this like a pretty popular policy at the time?
I can't really speak to too much of the world's governments, but as far as I know, there wasn't the best way I can offer insight would be to compare it to the UN response to the US invasion of Iraq, whereas the US invasion of Iraq was an international catastrophe for most governments. The vast majority of people of the globe were absolutely disgusted at the US invasion of Iraq. But the sanctions, it didn't generate quite that kind of reaction. So even if governments were opposed to it in various ways, the United States was able to kick Iraq out of the UN basically single-handedly, but it wasn't people weren't as ardently opposed to US policy as they would soon be.
Gotcha. Do you know if there was any disgust at Albright's comments in the 90s when she said that, or
there
was? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to remember what that was like.
Yeah.
I found myself. Yeah.
Sorry. I was like a total like moron, like living in the suburbs of St. Louis, just like totally oblivious to all this in 1996.
You're not a moron for living in the world you live in, right?
True.
We live in a society, right?
Yeah.
But what you do speak to is those of us, and I was certainly slowly, but by 98, 99, thanks to being appropriately enough, being a soldier, absolutely moving to be very critical of the United States relationship with Iraq and how the United States treated Iraq, the policies, increasingly unhappy with and disgusted and finding it more and more morally outrageous, particularly because although I was always willing to admit that the early in UN and analysis of the sanctions, the consequence of the sanctions, the potentially 500,000 children dying, I was willing to accept them as tentative, and it turns out they were wrong. Mm-hmm. They vastly overstated the number of deaths. It still was weird and isolating to be critical of the U.S. relationship with Iraq or how the United States treated Iraq, U.S. foreign policy, and there were people there. I mean, Madeleine Albright, as Secretary of State, would receive pushback. Going to college campuses wasn't easy for her. She would receive, student peace groups and leftist groups and whatnot who were critical of her and would try to hold her to account, ask her tough questions, ask her to account for her own actions. In Ohio State, 1998, she had a rather infamous interaction where she said that the United States was right in doing what they were doing. She would say in 1998, again in a different scenario, the United States had to use force because we are America. We are the indispensable nation.
Yeah.
So it was hard at the time to go against that and to firmly plant your feet on the ground, which is what makes, I think, Albright Monument such a powerful song.
Yeah, let's get into this song too. So we have a lot of vocab in this song that I think is worth discussing a little bit. You and I are both teachers, and we were going into a hard lesson plan. We would be talking about some vocab most likely. So we have some terms in here like Allied planes that are listed in the first line. We have Basra, we have Ba'ath regime, we have Red Scare, we have Cradle of Affluence, we have Cradle of Democracy, and then we have, references to Truman, and then Madeleine Albright. So I'm just curious what you can tell me a little bit about the Allied planes that are in the 1990s in and around Iraq. What was that like?
Yeah, so the United States enforced what they called no-fly zones over Iraq to enforce the sanctions, and as a response to the U.S. Beating Iraq in the Gulf War. And so the Allied planes are U.S. and British allied nations, as they were called, kind of carrying on the World War II language of the United States-British relationship of enforcing the no-fly zones with allied airplanes, with basically the most up-to-date, cutting-edge jet and fighter jet technologies to ensure that nothing was flying over Iraq that wasn't with U.S. approval.
Okay.
So that would be, and by the end of the 90s under Clinton, increasing use of airstrikes and bombings against Iraq.
Okay, we'll get into a couple of bombings here in a second too. Excuse me. What is? Can you tell me a little bit about Basra, the city of Basra?
Yeah, it's a port city in south east Iraq. It's a major port city, and it's where a lot of like oil and stuff like that travels through. And so it's an important city in modern day Iraq, and I gather it's also historically significant as well.
Excellent. Okay, so what about the Ba'ath regime? Tell me a little bit about this, just for just the bullet points a little bit for the listeners out there.
Yeah, it was Saddam Hussein's political party that forged out of Iraq becoming fully independent in the 1960s, and it had a secularist, depending on how you count it, socialist, Soviet Union friendly approach to policy that put a premium on even with the amount of theft and personal enrichment that the regime did of its key members, of building hospitals and such for the people. So it was not like as democratic as it ought to have been, and it was, of course, not. There were no elections or anything like that, but it did put a premium on giving at least something back to the people of Iraq and trying to hold the nation together in a secular setting, as opposed to using or playing into regional or religious divisions. Not to say that they weren't there, because of course, there certainly, as I understand it, were, but that was its kind of broad-based approach to governing.
Excellent. Okay, so what about the Red Scare? Just kind of remind everybody what that means.
Yeah, in the United States, there were 2 times when the federal government cracked down on leftist political thought and action, going after leftists in 1919, deporting several hundred, shipping them to the about to be formed, or in the process of being formed, the Soviet Union. And the second one was after World War II in the early 1950s, when Senator Joseph McCarthy, along with several other events like the Soviet Union detonating a nuclear weapon and the Communist Party in China winning the Civil War, was a time when the federal government began clearing out communists from its own ranks and persecuting communists for being members of the Communist Party. This is when the Hollywood 10, the blacklist of the Hollywood 10 is formed. And it's this kind of moment when really the United States it made politically good sense to clean leftists out of public spaces, professional spaces. And it kind of, the two are kind of known as for basically being times when the government was cleared of the unwanted, who have political affiliations that are deemed unacceptable.
Okay, cool. What do you see as being these other two terms here that they kind of bounce off each other near the end of the song? Cradle of affluence, cradle of democracy. Tell me about these terms.
Yeah, so one of the ways that people have long thought of the Iraq region, the Mesopotamia, is the cradle of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where some of the first urban occupations of humans occur, and it gets called the cradle of civilization. Turns out that I think the song is playing with the phrasing because it's talking about Iraq. It doesn't use the word cradle of civilization, but it talks about the Truman Monument in Greece,
Yeah.
which is also thought of as the cradle of democracy because of Athens becomes kind of known by the 1700s as this kind of really important experiment in democracy. The people who founded like the United States and other and later generations kind of embrace as this kind of like model to kind of try to adhere to on some level. Of course, it's the actual history is much more complicated, but it's this kind of like ideal form of democracy, birthplace of democracy. And then of course, cradle of affluence. That's the United States. The United States is arguably cracked the code for how to have an affluent society on some level for a couple of decades there in the Cold War. And it's just one way to, I guess, connect the three countries, pretty disparate, otherwise unrelated countries to kind of, or not really strongly connected countries together thematically.
Excellent. Okay, so we've got let's get into the lyrics here a little bit. So we've got this first line about Wadi's best friend's youngest sister was denied a decent burial because for 2 days they couldn't douse the flames the Allied planes had showered on her tiny body. And I know that in 99, I've been finding some evidence about some airstrikes in 1999 that Democracy Now! Still has things on their website still posted from those airstrikes. And I'm just wondering if you can tell me a little bit about what you've found or what you know about involving airstrikes in the region from those Allied planes that you mentioned earlier and kind of described in some detail there.
Yeah, so you're basically, that's basically what this seems to be referring to because of a future lecture or future lyric that will be specific on which location. Because by 1998, the United States initiated Operation Desert Fox, the Clinton administration, which some have pointed out is timed to his own domestic troubles and woes with the impeachment, that he ratchets up the heat against Iraq. In fact, I definitely very clearly remember late December 1998 wondering if the United States was going to formally get into a war with Iraq again. And the month of December, by the end of December and January and into February, the United States launches airstrikes against Iraqi cities and locations. And it's tied to Iraq kicking out the weapons inspectors because the United States was a key player in the weapons inspection regimes, which was the 90s inspection regimes, which were not the ones that come later, the ones that, as far as anyone knows, did seriously deconstruct all of Iraq's missile technologies with nuclear, biological, and Iraq kicked them out because it turns out the CIA had been infiltrating them and using them to like spy on Iraq, plant listening devices and whatnot. And in response, Clinton's started striking targets. And on January 25th and 26th, January 25th, with the United States acknowledged on 26th that 11 civilians were murdered by 2 precision guided missiles that were 18 miles outside of their target, and they hit Basra in a particularly crowded, low-income area.
Kids too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh. So then we have this next song or this next lyric, and all the paper trails that lead to all the roads that lead to all these Basras make it seem like we're all just collateral damage waiting to be happen in some unforeseen Pentagon budget drill. And so, something that really stands out to me here is how he says all these Basras. Like he's like Basras, like, it's not just a thing. It is many of these things. And that's just kind of what that is saying to me is like, I can tell you about this one example in Basra because I have this one Democracy Now! Article, but this is like super common. Like, do you know, like if it was common, if this was something that was commonplace and we just like don't know about a lot of it?
Well, we actually know a lot of it. It's the problem is the people putting the dots together were the anti-war leftists who, could be dismissed as being Ba'athist apologists for the regime, as opposed to serious, morally clear critics of U.S. air power. And over 500 U.S. airstrikes were done in that year after the United States ramped up airstrikes, which
man,
with Clinton promising to basically destroy Iraq if he felt it was needed. And yeah, it was the 98. By the end of 98, all through 1999, things were incredibly grotesque. Some of the missiles had things like "To Saddam, Merry Christmas" or "Die, you maggots" written on them.
Wow.
According to reporting.
So you mentioned that a lot of these things like that we don't know, and that kind of like mentions the paper trails, right? So I'm imagining that people like you, historians, are out there just like going through this stuff, still trying to put a lot of these stories together, I mean, that's kind of your job, right?
Yeah, that's where it gets complicated, because what it turns out is most of the time the US press, particularly like Reuters and AP and all that, they were covering it, but they weren't connecting the dots. Like the reporting was very much about the actual missile launches, not unlike the way Vietnam War itself was covered too, especially with the South Vietnamese government, or South Vietnam, excuse me, being the heavily bombed of the two. Between North and South, the United States dropped vastly more bombs on South Vietnam. But unlike the North Vietnamese bombing campaigns against North Vietnam, the bombs that fell on North Vietnam, the reporting didn't really connect the dots. So critics did, but the press was not. And that's the way this worked in Iraq as well, where if you were a close observer of the news and you read, Pentagon reports as they were being released to the public or as information became more available, you could write a pretty damning list without having to do much work. And I think that's what this is kind of suggesting, or kind of hints at, where this kind of information is out there. It's possible to follow it. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of creativity and imagination, because so few people with any real platform had done that work, who weren't already tarred and feathered as just being anti-American, pro-Saddam, pro-terrorists, whose work would more or less be rendered useless as a result of those smears.
Yeah, what does this last part of this line mean about unforeseen Pentagon budget drills? Tell me more about this line, because I'm just trying to wonder, like, who is it unforeseen for and things like that. I'm just curious about this line.
Yeah, this song has a lot of dense lyricism, and the second phrase, the second line, has always been the one that sticks out to me, with the use of the euphemism for when you kill civilians, collateral damage, instead of murdering civilians.
Yeah.
Or murdering people, really. And then the unforeseen Pentagon budget drill, it's basically suggested to me, it suggests to me that this is the government, the Pentagon spends money by dropping bombs and launching munitions. So it always sounded to me like at some point, especially someone in Canada, the United States might just decide to drop bombs on a city that someone like Chris happens to be in. And that's just how things work. And of course, if you're actually in Iraq, your chances of getting struck by a bomb is even worse. But he did kind of phrase it in a way that made it sound like we're all just, like, if you're not behind the stick of an aircraft, because of course this was before the unmanned drone strikes, you're a likely target at some point.
Do you see in the next line, the Ba'ath regime is just the Red Scare of yesteryear? Do you see that being like an appropriate comparison? Tell me about the play here that he uses for this event of the Red Scare, and then the way that the Ba'ath regime was presented in the media.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something it's a tricky comparison to make. It'd be easy to overplay the comparison and to kind of fudge the lines, because after all, the U.S. Red Scare was domestic.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't about what the Soviet Union was doing or what communists in Great Britain or Canada were doing. It was about what communist United States were doing, with connections to a foreign government. But I think it makes sense in the sense that the Red Scare by the mid-90s was more known for being silly, irrational, and reactionary, like a a joke that I would hear constantly on like Mystery Science Theater 3000 would be when they watch an old 50s film is anytime there's a shadow on the wall, they say, look, a communist.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way it was. No, right. That's the way people who grew up in the 70s and 80s kind of knew the Red Scare to be.
Yeah.
And I think it's trying to point out that the extreme anti-Ba'athist approach that the federal government of the United States was taking at the time really was more based in fear than rational analysis. And indeed, one of the notable things is this is one of the first times where I saw the Ba'athist party hinted at in popular media. And in 2003, the United States government would adopt and implement an incredibly rigid anti-Ba'athist policy when it toppled the Iraqi government that did very potentially, as far as analysis I've read, trigger a lot of bad blowback, a lot of bad consequences down the road.
Gotcha. I've always wondered about that, comparing those two different events. Because like whenever I think about the Red Scare, I think about, the trials and like Dalton Trumbo and stuff like that. And I was just curious on your thoughts on that, because that's always been kind of an interesting comparison for me within the lyrics. And I like it, of course, like it's a great song and I love the lyrics. I'm not like critiquing it. It's just like, I wonder if there is a more appropriate comparison in history.
I would say if you're in the late 1990s and you're thinking about a comparison, I think it culturally makes sense to me.
Sure. Now,
like I said, it definitely has its limitations, and there definitely are severe like kind of problems if you try to equate them. But it definitely gets at the critique of U.S. government's kind of like painting of the Baathists as these all-encompassing, totalizing worldview where global conquest is your goal, when that's not really what the Ba'athist Party was about. And it justified also, especially, an incredibly totalitarianly hardline, aggressive stance against Iraq. Okay, I think it kind of conveys that meaning, even if it is a bit flawed or a bit problematic of a comparison.
Gotcha. Okay, so then we have these next lyrics where Chris essentially just devolves into despair of drinking himself to sleep, and realizing his role within this system where like Chris, you and I, like we have jobs and we pay taxes into a system that uses at least a tiny bit of our money for purposes that we are probably against. I think it's safe to assume. And so we see Chris here just falling apart, essentially, realizing that he's never really going to know a better world than this one. And I'm wondering on your thoughts on these particular lines here that come next in the song.
Yeah, these next two lines or these next two phrases are the gut punch, right? This is the payoff to the setup of a more intellectual exploration, is the kind of the uncompromising, unflinching view of the problem and the kind of moral stakes. I mean, it is in so many words a death machine, and complicity is a complicated concept, but when your goal is to stop it, it's hard not to feel complicit.
Yeah.
And in the Turning Gears, I can't help but think of Mario Savio's famous statement about throwing your bodies upon the gears, upon the wheels, upon all the apparatus, and you got to make it stop. You got to tell the people who own it, the people who run it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from operating at all.
Yeah.
And
an amazing quote, amazing statement.
Yeah, and it's easy to feel guilty for not doing this. It's kind of like Cop Out of Frame, where it's a guilty feeling for not having broken the system is bad. But to be fair, I mean, Mario Savio said that before the Vietnam War really heated up, and it still heated up despite him trying to, as best he could in the time he had, throwing his body on the churning gears, and it still didn't quite. It's tough when you're trying to stop a powerful government from doing something, how guilty
Yeah.
should you feel when you fail?
Yeah. Ugh. Oh my God. I'm gonna have an existential meltdown here right now. Then we have these lines about connecting Independence, which is less than 2 hours down the highway from where you are sitting right now. Tell me about the atomic murderer enshrined in Independence, USA.
Yeah, I just realized this is actually all one sentence technically.
Yeah, it is. It's wild. I'm
Yeah,
going to break it up because it's
it's chunks.
It's so many words.
Well, yeah, as we were discussing, as I was discussing, or as we were discussing with, or as I said when you were discussing the cradle of affluence. I mean, Chris is clearly including Canada in that, the Canadian government as part of the cradle of affluence, which speaks to the kind of the power of the post World War II prosperity that the two countries, United States and Canada, really do create. Functioning of a democracies of a sort, as problematic and as flawed as they were, where on some level people can influence government, and the demands of the people can shift government actions. As weird as it may sound on a propaganda podcast to make that claim, it could happen. It did happen, and people's individual lives were made better. I mean, to quote another propaganda song, or to reference another propaganda song, there's indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
And that is a minor miracle that should not be discounted, as anyone who wakes up at night might appreciate.
Yeah.
And to then put one's individual experience into that global context, and to then try to think through it, and that, in Independence, Missouri, that's where Truman's home is, right?
Yeah.
And the only thing I'll say about the history profession role in discussing the atomic weapons debates of the 1990s is that historians did grapple with this concept. It was something that had long been brewing, a charge, an accusation, a claim that Truman's use of nuclear weaponry — the United States is the only country in the entire world to ever use nuclear weaponry. It used it twice on civilian populations — was an outgrowth of the vicious race war the United States was fighting in the Pacific against Japan, and that his decision to do so was motivated by racial animus on some level, as opposed to strategic necessity. And it has various permutations and variations, and at some point debates about whether or not Truman was really trying to show the Soviet Union that that's really what the United States could do or not. Although appropriately enough, Stalin actually knew before Truman did that there was a nuclear bomb being worked on in the United States. That was one of the hot debates of the 90s, and historians were involved in it. So it was easy to kind of take the worst version of Truman's actions, because, on some level, it's absolutely true that he's an atomic murderer. Inside the United States, to call the U.S. government being led by an atomic murderer, especially given the Red Scare of the late 40s that started to emerge in the late 40s, might be a little bit difficult and be treated seriously. I think it's a harder charge to make people kind of agree with, but it still serves a purpose of kind of, I think, capturing that death machine element of the U.S. foreign policy, because whether we like it or not, it is murder, it is death, and it is U.S. weaponry and foreign policy and personnel and people that are doing it.
Huge body count too, across history. Just, I can't even begin to fathom what that death count is. Tell me about this wild statue of Truman in Athens at the corner of George and Constantine, at an intersection that is pretty close to the Acropolis and the Temple of Zeus.
Well, I don't I don't want to take credit for your work. I mean,
I've been loving digging into this. This has been so fun for me, learning about this particular statue. It's been cracking me up.
So the one thing I'll add is just, this is definitely connected to the Truman Doctrine after World War II. Greece, Italy, and a couple other parts of that part of the world were not doing well at the end of the war. The war in some ways didn't really end when the German government collapsed and the Soviet Union won. And one of the outflows of that was the United States had to have a policy on it, and chose to have a policy on it, chose to support a group of people who more or less encapsulated the Nazi collaborators, Nazi government officials, people who weren't really happy with democracy. It's much more complex, but that's essentially what, especially a more leftist take on the Civil War would be, is that this is the United States supporting murderers, even if both sides definitely did things like murder children in the Civil War, that the bad side effectively won. The pro-Nazi Germany side effectively won. And so you can go ahead and take away with what you found, because this is all your research.
I mean, well, something that I don't know much about is like this Greek Civil War that was going on. Do you know much about that? Because this is something that I haven't really looked into a whole heck of a lot, which is where the Truman Doctrine comes in at the end of this Greek Civil War. But I don't really know much about that Civil War at all.
Yeah, I can't be too specific myself. I can give like the standard college level history class for U.S. history class version of it,
sure,
which is more or less what I just did, which is that after the war, partisans emerged to try to defend a version of communism and democracy that would empower the people to make decisions economically, and did get help from the Soviet Union. And it was an ugly, I gather, it was incredibly brutal war where the stakes were very high and both sides acted accordingly. But the United States decisively came down against the people who were being supported by the Soviet Union, the people who claimed to be communist or Democrats, small d Democrats. And it became the basis of the U.S. foreign policy from really 1947-ish to 1989, 1995, depending on, or 1989, 1992, depending on how you count it. So the entirety of the Cold War rests on the United States response to what happened in Greece and Italy. At least that's the way Truman sold it. And
gotcha.
Yeah, so you can talk about the statue, then we can tie it to the song.
I mean, like, so this statue is so fascinating because it keeps getting vandalized and torn down and destroyed, and it got bombed at one point by what the media described as a leftist group. But it wasn't put up for a long time because the city council were a bunch of socialists, and they were like, no, there's no way we're putting back up, because there was a lot of apparently resentment among the Greek people of the American involvement in the Greek Civil War. So I can't really, talk too much in specifics about that. Maybe Keith and I can dive a lot more into that when we do the part 2 of this episode in the coming months. But I just love the fact that it talks about the ritual at the corner of George and Constantine, because the ritual to me seems to be the Greek people toppling the statue and like throwing paint on it and just vandalizing it. And it's just absolutely hilarious that the ritual at the corner of George and Constantine is the Greek people being like, forget this statue. This thing's a joke. We want it gone. It doesn't belong here. And I just think that is so hilarious that there just seems to be this annual tradition of destroying this Truman statue. It just makes me laugh.
Yeah, I do want to point out that as you shared the Google Maps view of the statue, there's an anarchy sign written on the base.
I know, that's the current Google image search.
It is from 2019, which is, I mean, Greece has been through a lot lately, and there's a lot that leftists have been fighting about to save Greece from like really bad outcomes. So I can understand that it's surprising, but understanding that the statue still resonates and the anarchy sign still means something.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I have really enjoyed this conversation a whole heck of a lot. What are some of what are you thinking as we go away from this conversation? Like, what does this song ask you to like consider as a person now in 2022 who, you do this kind of work for a living? But you're a person who cares about the future and loves this band like I do. Tell me what this is asking you to take away in the here and now.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of got a couple tracks all going at once in my head. One is, it is a piece of history. It is a piece of media history that captures a moment when, particularly 1999 and 2000, when the United States really did drum up a kind of air war against Iraq that was incredibly brutal, and it killed people. As the song opening reminds us, the song opens with a tragedy that was entirely knowable and understandable and predictable, and explores the kind of, even in 1999, 2000, how difficult it was to make clear that doing this to Iraq isn't rational politics. It's supporting a death machine, and at the same time, to oppose it was really difficult. And yet you could find some joy in the fact that there was a cottage industry in Athens of toppling a statue that kind of spoke to the hope that someone might imagine existing in the late 90s. And at the same time, there's that track. There's also the current day things we can kind of pull from it, which is to always remember to kind of like take a step back and grapple with the things we're living through and hearing, and try to find ways to contextualize the world around us and put things in perspective, and to acknowledge that we'll face things that we can't really solve, but we still have to we still have to live.
Yeah I mean, we don't really have a choice, well, Chris, I'm really thrilled that you came back on to chat about Albright Monument Baghdad with me. Means a lot. And thank you so much for coming back for your 4th appearance on Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. Keith and I appreciate you and your involvement with this project basically since day one. So thanks for being, such an awesome partner to hang out with us.
Thanks for inviting me and letting me talk about these absolute bangers of a track.
For what it's worth, this is for the people of Iraq and Afghanistan.
Victims of state fucking terrorism. Fuck.
Watch his best friends and listen to what's died, and he's a better for 2 days. Who never played out of the shower, out of tiny body. Look at the trails that lead you all that lead you all these bachelor scenes. Uncanonical damage. Waiting to be happened. It's a unforeseen. Fucking better than what you drill. To this bad regime. Just the red skin of yesteryear. And I drink myself to sleep, cause everything's fake. Bad we can amount to anything more. Bad we don't give the subsidies. The more we want the death machine. Then we make a liberty. Waiting for somebody else to throw. The body's butchering it. I drink myself to sleep because I'm losing faith that when you in the cradle of after risk and seas, I'm sinking dry for individual strength through staying power swinging fists that will never look back and laugh. I think irony that is something murderers enshrined in Independence USA, 20,000 miles from here, in the cream of democracy. It's another better year. For a cottage industry, a ritual at the corner of George and Constantine. That's what it's going to recount. It's a complicated money mode. Thanks. That's a recent song called Albright Monument Baghdad.
Tim Browne, welcome back to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, Tim, it is a delight to welcome you as a return guest since you were here what feels like another lifetime for episode 32, where we talked about Lotus Gate. And I'm curious what has happened in your life since you were here last with me.
I've been working from home and I don't know, working on music. I've released the new Elway record that just came out a couple of weeks ago. And then a few months before that, another band that I'm in, Dirty Shrines, put out their first LP as well.
Sweet.
So trying to keep busy playing music and then, wasting my life working for somebody else in the interim.
Yeah, well, I hear you, man. But that new Elway record, The Best of All Possible Worlds, did it come out on April Fool's Day? Was that it?
It did, yeah.
Oh, that's just so perfect. How have you found the reemergence of Elway into the world that we now find ourselves in after the last couple of years? Has it been pretty good for all of you? Because that new record is absolutely wonderful.
Well, it's nice to actually get it out because I mean we recorded it like early 2021 and it just took a long time for everyone to finish everything and for us to get it mixed and mastered, and dealing with pandemic stuff and how long it takes to get vinyl made and everything. It's so nice to finally have it out, and it's going to be nice to start playing shows as well.
You guys haven't gotten out there for any shows yet?
Well, we played 3 shows in October with the Menzingers. We played a couple of shows in Chicago in December.
Oh, sweet.
But this coming Saturday is our album release show in Denver. And then we've got some shows with Hot Water Music and then a tour with the Holy Mess this summer.
Holy smokes. That new Hot Water Music is crazy good also. I'm sure you've been listening to that quite a bit too.
I've only given it a couple of spins, but I'll be trying to like dig deep on it before we play with them in June so that I can familiarize myself with some of the new stuff. I'm excited because it's the first one with Cresswell, right? Like where he's actually singing on it. So I'm excited to see what that's going to be like.
Yeah, he sounds fabulous on it. Like it's just such a seamless transition, and it gives it like a new freshness for Hot Water that, you know, it kind of takes you aback, and like it throws some new spins in there that kind of just gives it something new. Because they're such a iconic band at this point that to get a fresh ingredient within that formula kind of makes it a neat listening experience, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also he fits in just perfectly. I mean, he's got such a fantastic voice.
Absolutely.
I was apprehensive the first time that I saw them with him instead of Chris Wallard. Because I love the Flatliners and I love Cresswell's voice so much, but I was, I'd just been so used to Chris Wallard's voice that I thought it was going to be a little iffy, and it turns out it's fucking fantastic. And my worry was in vain.
I love it. Well, Tim, we're you're back on my propaganda hobby podcast, where we break down individual songs in a very intense manner. And we're going to get into a song that is quite intense in a little bit, but when we got off the phone last time, when we recorded Lotus Gate months ago, you mentioned before we hung up that you really loved Albright Monument Baghdad from Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. So I'm excited to have you on to chat about that. But since we last recorded, the reissue of Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, which was fixed up by Jason Livermore at the Blasting Room, has emerged into the world as of this past November. And I'm wondering if you have any impressions or major observations about the reissue of Empires that or that you feel are worth sharing.
Yeah, I mean, the OG Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, one of my favorite records of all time, but it is a little bit a victim of like Ryan Greenification. where a lot of that Fat Wreck stuff in the late 90s has like kind of like the drums specifically are kind of like trebly. There's like a clicky sounding kick. And I think that Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes suffered a little bit from like a kind of lack of nuance in the drum sound. Kind of just sounded like you're listening to it through laptop speakers, even when you're listening to it. And this is me really reaching for criticism, right? I mean, like
Sure.
it's a life-changing record.
Of course.
I love dearly, but the remix and remaster is the drums are so fucking powerful.
Yeah.
And it gives it an entire new life. It makes the album like push as hard as like supporting cast does in terms of like the audio dynamic. I just think it sounds more balanced and the drums sound more dynamic, and it really improved the overall listening experience, especially with headphones.
Yeah.
I'll say I don't know why they took out all the clips though, because like it's so weird when you're expecting a clip and you don't get it listening to the record just because of repeated listens over the course of the last 20 plus years. And it's just, you know, where the fuck is my onward Christian soldiers?
Yeah.
You know, but other than that, that's my only minor criticism. I think it sounds great. I don't even listen to the old one anymore now.
Amazing. Yeah. And you know, it really speeds up the pace of the record too. Like, even though the clips are hardly anything at all time wise, the record is like in and out, over and done almost in the blink of an eye. Now it feels like it doesn't have those like breaks interspliced anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Which, I mean, I get the draw of that too. You know, I mean, I understand why you'd want it to like move along at such a good clip, because it is such a fast, urgent sounding record. It's just my personal predilections from having listened to it thousands of times before with the clips, you know?
Yeah, you're not alone. We've heard that a whole bunch of times. And, you know, I'm sure the band has also heard it a bunch of times at this point too. And it's kind of neat that both versions exist. And that would be really interesting if there was like a deluxe edition of the new reissue where the clips were back in, because then it would be like you'd have the really quick and efficient version of the one without the clips. You'd have the original version, and then you'd have the reissue with the remix, remaster, and the clips. That'd be crazy if there was like 3 versions. But, you know, now I'm just like tossing out crazy ideas here.
Yeah, I mean, they're not U2 for Christ's sakes.
No, absolutely. So, you know, I'm wondering what it is about the song Albright Monument Baghdad specifically that is kind of like an overall purpose and reason for why this song was one of the standout ones for you to want to come back on the show and chat about that one.
Well, I mean, I'll try to be as terse as possible about the reason, but I mean, aside from the fact that after reading the lyrics out of the booklet when I first had this record, trying to like connect the dots with all of the different references that were being made and learning so much about American foreign policy. I mean, when I first started getting into this record specifically, it was right as we were going to war in Afghanistan, and later on went to war in Iraq in 2001 and 2003. And I can remember the punk scene, and I was just young enough to be the target demographic, to be given these sort of like sloganeering platitudes about how Bush and the Republicans are imperialist, warlike presidents, or the warlike party, and
Right.
all of these things. And one of the things that this song in particular helped me to realize is that it is really not a Democrat versus Republican, left versus right issue, that the Clinton administration was just as hawkish as the Bush administration was, and that there is a long and storied history of United States foreign policy being evil and imperialist regardless of party. And I think that if like the punk voter folks would have had their druthers when I was that age in 2003, they would have not had me understand that the Democrats are just as capable of these like ultimate stupidities and evils. And so this song kind of like helped me become jaded about both political parties in the United States, not just the Republicans like Justin Sane would have me believe, you know?
Yeah, totally. And I'm 38, so like that was like exactly the time period when I was getting all of those messages as well. And this is one of those kinds of songs to where I didn't get it. This was beyond my ability to understand. But I'm so glad that stuff like this did exist because it constantly was challenging me to not just be, a total moron, 19-year-old or whatever. So I get it. I understand what you're saying. I was right there in that same demographic as you. One of the things I'm curious about before we get into some of the seriousness of the content, which you just alluded to, is your thoughts on the musical performance on this absolute rager. Do you have any like thoughts on the performance that stands out to you a whole bunch on this one? Because then we can get into the super serious stuff after we talk about the fun stuff.
Yeah, the like kind of clean guitar at the beginning of this song is one of my very favorite propaganda riffs.
Nice.
I mean, like, I believe the song's in the key of like C sharp minor, and that like kind of is just like such a cool trick where you're kind of playing the open B and E strings while also playing just a C sharp power chord on the fourth fret of the A string, and it's a trick that I have ripped off, and so many people I know have ripped off so many times, because it's like simple and effective.
Mm-hmm.
And then as soon as the song actually kicks in, it's a bunch of shit that I'm not good enough at guitar to actually rip off. Otherwise, I might have tried that too.
Yeah.
But I love that this song is just so fucking fast. And the first verse sentences fly by in just moments.
Yeah.
To where like it was what compelled me to get the lyric sheet out and then follow along and be like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know. I mean, it's a rapid fire song, and like there's so much happening right there at the beginning too. You really nailed that because I listened to it like 5 or 6 times in a row right before we got on the phone here. And he's got these lines that say, and all the paper trails that lead to all the roads that lead to all these Basras make it seem like we're all just collateral damage. And underneath that is one of my most favorite Jord fills. But Chris is just going so fast on the vocals. It's kind of mind blowing. It kind of almost like reminds me of like a hip hop song, which is just flying through words. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine trying to nail that vocal take perfectly was a real son of a bitch.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Have you ever seen the band play this one live before?
I've not.
Okay. I know that they were playing it live because I think that a version is online from a 2003 performance in Chicago at the Congress Theater when they played there. So I think there's a really great version online that is unbelievable, and they nail it too. I mean, obviously, this is just kind of what they do, where they make these songs that just sound unbelievable and so hard, and then they just go out there and they play it live. Like it was just like, oh, of course they just totally nailed that. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah,
of
course.
It's totally crazy. Do you have any other thoughts on any of the performance within this one at all? Because we got so much to talk about with regards to words.
Yeah, I mean, not specifically. I think that this is one of those propaganda songs where the thing that sticks out to me mostly is the way that the lyrics have remained relevant throughout.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier the relevance of the Clinton administration. So here we have a song. The record comes out February of 2001. So we have basically a pre-Bush presidency written song. We have the title, Albright Monument, Baghdad. And I'm wondering any of your thoughts on the title here and just kind of like your impressions of Albright in general, who recently just died. So this is a very timely song as well.
Yeah. Rest in piss. Yeah. I mean, I think there's like with almost every propaganda song, there's a hint of it's a little sardonic.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of the people of Iraq wanting to memorialize Madeleine Albright, but more likely being forced to memorialize her by whatever puppet government the United States installs there. I mean, there's obviously very specific references that are kind of a backdrop to this, but there is not an actual monument to Madeleine Albright in Iraq, and it would be an offense to everything that is good and reasonable if there were.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is coming hot off the heels of the Clinton administration's bombing of Iraq in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention the decades spanning sanctions since the end of the first Gulf War, where our military failed to oust the Hussein regime,
Mm-hmm.
or the Ba'ath regime, and I mean, leading to the deaths of millions of people.
Yeah.
Not to mention a legacy of American imperialism and imposition of Western ideals that is directly responsible for 9/11.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I dug into this a little bit, and in the days after Albright died, a very well-known clip of her resurfaces.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died when in Hiroshima. And is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
From a 1996 interview that she did with Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, and Stahl says, "We have heard that 500,000 Iraqi children have died. I mean, that is more children than died in Hiroshima. And is the price worth it?" And Albright says, "I think that is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it." So because of all these sanctions that were placed on the country, we have the Secretary of State for the United States saying that 500,000 kids is just basically part of the deal, and it's just like, it's a really stunning moment when you think about the fact that this is done under a Democrat Party president, where, like you said earlier, they're presented as being more of a less hawkish party, but that is totally fiction.
Yeah, I don't really think there is a difference whatsoever between the two parties in terms of their hawkishness in the Middle East. I mean, the thing about our involvement in the Middle East is something that we have spent almost my entire life learning slowly.
Yeah.
Is that we need to keep an ideological foothold in the Middle East. We need to have our interest expressed there so that we can plunder their natural resources. I mean, and that transcends party, that's the one thing that all American politicians can agree on.
Yeah. Let's chat about these lyrics here for a second. So we've got this opening line here. Wadia's best friend's youngest sister was denied a decent burial because for 2 days they couldn't douse the flames the Allied planes had showered on her tiny body. And, I don't know how much you've looked into this, but something that really shook me was the fact that I started Google searching bombing attacks in Basra, which is also an Iraqi city, which is mentioned in the song. And I found a news report from Democracy Now! On January 27th, 1999, where Albright defends the right of U.S. and British pilots to protect themselves while patrolling no-fly zones over Iraq, after the Pentagon acknowledged that a U.S. missile strayed off its target and hit a residential neighborhood in the southern city of Basra. And basically what happens on January 25th, 1999, is that there were 17 deaths, including 10 children in Basra. And it was just like, it rattled me yesterday, Tim, when I found this story, because I was like, I wonder if the song is talking about any one particular attack. And sure enough, there it was. It took me 5 minutes to find it. And it's like something that happened like 23 years ago. And I just realized this specific reference within the song. And it took me almost no time to find it. And I was like, I can't believe I never knew about this.
Yeah. I mean, the real tragedy of it is that it's just one story in a mountain of others.
Yeah.
And I mean, this was the Clinton bombing campaign in 1999. This is before we even manufactured the reason for us to go back to Iraq in 2003. I mean, and millions have died and or been displaced since then. And so the real tragedy about this song is that I mean, there are a million Wadia's best friend's youngest sisters and her family and her parents and stuff. I think the point of starting the song with those lyrics to reference a specific happening, but also to make it as stark and plain to understand as is possible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really troubling whenever you, like you just said, how this is just a single example in a mountain of examples. And then you think about where the song kind of goes next, where it says, the paper trails that lead to all the roads that lead to all these bazaars make it seem like we're all just collateral damage waiting to be happened in an unforeseen Pentagon budget drill. And I love the use of we in this line where it says we're all just collateral damage waiting to be happening. Like I feel like it asks us, the listeners, to consider ourselves as a presence within the song. Like here I am, I'm sitting in my little house in Buffalo, New York, and it asked me to consider myself as a collateral damage in a military drill. It asked me to consider my 8-year-old daughter as collateral damage in some Pentagon budget drill. And it's just so striking when you think about how many stories and how many, unforgivable tragedies have been done and committed. And I feel like this song is asking me to consider myself in that situation as the listener.
Yeah. I mean, consider for a moment if there was a group, say an ethnic group or a localized group somewhere in the United States that had access to natural resources that they were categorically denying the United States government access to. I mean, it wouldn't be too very long before they figured out some kind of way to justify the dead bodies in the way of being granted access to those resources, It could just as easily have been anybody. It definitely is the people in the Middle East because they are sitting on top of oil fields.
Yeah.
And it's only a matter of time before anybody who is preventing, the global political hegemony from getting control of those resources. I mean, it's only a matter of time before, military intervention trademark is used to gain access to those resources. Could be anybody.
Yeah. What do you think about the line, today's Ba'ath regime is just the Red Scare of yesteryear? Tell me about your thoughts on that line.
Well, I mean, Saddam Hussein was Saddam Hussein, not necessarily the greatest guy in the world. Just like the Soviet Union's government, not necessarily the greatest people, the greatest government in the history of mankind, right? But you can divorce those facts from the way that they are painted in the West. And I mean, this was before the war in Iraq. I mean, it was almost like scarily accurate because it was so easy to paint Saddam Hussein's government as being this like scary terroristic boogeyman that won't hesitate to get chemical or nuclear weapons and then use them on the West. And I mean, that's how it was propagandized to people in the late 90s and justified the Clinton era bombings and the sanctions of Iraq. And that's how we were sold on the war in Iraq in 2003 too. I mean, if you phrase something the right way and you appeal to people's fear and paranoia and their delicate American sensibilities, then before you know it, they will be screaming for their blood out in the streets, and chanting rah rah, and putting "these colors don't run" stickers on the back of their fucking Ford Explorers or whatever. And
yeah, I mean, our number, like they've got our number. They know exactly what to say to us in order to be staggeringly persuasive to get like a large bulk of the population behind these kinds of activities. Like it seems actually like it's really easy, and that really makes me sad.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other thing that's sad about it is that even if you know enough or have a conscience enough to be adversarial towards the idea of American imperialism, and you can see through the guise of like, yeah, the Iraqi boogeymen are going to come into your house and slit your throat with a box cutter while you're sleeping or whatever, and you can go, all right, well, that's horseshit. You're still an unwitting participant in the crimes of our foreign policy because you pay taxes.
Yep.
You bolster the Pentagon budget.
Yeah.
Just by existing, just by living in this country and working and buying shit that you need to survive.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that you've seen recently that under the current presidency of Joe Biden, that the Pentagon budget was set at a record high in the most recent budget proposal. And that is pretty incredible to me. So when you think about the fact that this country doesn't have universal health care, we don't have guaranteed year-long maternity leave, we don't have universal pre-K, we don't have any forms of like free college education, even community college. So we have this society that we live in where we are taxed in ways that would suggest that we actually get a ton of like social benefits, like you might see in countries like Denmark. But we have virtually none of those benefits that I can tell, even though we are taxed like we are. And then you think about the Pentagon and the budget there and the Defense Department, and it's like, oh, I am a reluctant human subsidy, a moving part in a death machine. And it's like, wow, this song is exactly what I am, living here and just trying to get by, just like you said. I mean, it's crazy how accurate some of the lyrics in this song are, Yeah.
Well, it is the plight of the Western liberal to learn the language of the modern leftist tableau, right? To know that it's wrong, to know why it's wrong, and to know why it's fucked up that our money goes to Raytheon so that they can create bombs to drop on kids so that we can plunder their natural resources. And in so doing, protesting your complicity, but ultimately not really accomplishing much. And that's kind of like today's modern Democrat Party, like rah rah, isn't Trump so terrible? We need Medicaid for all, or we need to be able to provide for everybody in this country, and it's fucked up that we spend so much money on the military. However, I'm not gonna like put my ass on the line, and I'm just going to vote for somebody like Joe Biden, who will, bolster the Pentagon budget just like every other Republican or Democrat president, and pretend like I'm doing my part and kind of put off ever actually doing what needs to be done to right the helm.
Yeah. And if you think about, who Biden was vice president under, we have Barack Obama, who, there are recorded instances of Obama drone striking American citizens in Yemen, which is like an undeclared war territory, like an undeclared war, essentially. And so we have a record of, virtually every presidency doing this kind of stuff. And then you hear, oh, wouldn't it be so nice, like with Barack Obama back in office and stuff like that? So it's just this system where I feel like I have no control, like none. And so this next line, I drink myself to sleep because I'm losing faith that any of us will ever amount to anything more than reluctant subsidies. And it's how I feel. And it makes me feel just despair. Like I'm almost beyond words at describing how I feel about how the vision that I see for the future on how to make the world a better place. Like I just finished reading an amazing Kim Stanley Robinson book called Ministry for the Future that talks about ways to like, fight against climate change on like the global stage. And I'm like, oh, wouldn't this be so cool if our leaders actually believed in something like this? And these things are so obvious to me, but I know that within my lifetime, none of this will ever happen. And it's like, well, might as well crack a White Claw. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, idealism is a luxury
Yeah.
of of like well-to-do enough liberals.
Yeah.
And it's something that can be discussed when the rubber hits the road. However, I mean, it's just not something that people whose survival is at stake because of the decisions made by our government. I mean, people are too concerned with the immediate need to survive that they are not about to go and like bring a guillotine to the to the Pentagon,
Yeah.
And it's designed to be that way. You're supposed to be exhausted and you're supposed to want to just get shit tanked so that you don't actually do more than comprehend your complicity in being a moving part of a death machine. It is grim. It is grim, but it's very real.
I know. And like just to think about like what you need to do in society today in order to get through each month. So many people that I know are working multiple jobs and are paying child care, which is oftentimes $1,000 or more a month. And you're paying property taxes and you're paying skyrocketing gas costs, skyrocketing food costs. And there's a lot of unpredictability about schools and then things like that. And there's been so much unpredictability in the world the last couple of years that people are so fried that to contemplate how you are a part of a system of, organized chaos, war, destruction, death, and tragedy, it's just too much to comprehend when you think about how hard it is just to like pay your bills on a month by month basis. I mean, it's really so staggeringly exhausting that of course we're just going to kick up and turn on the TV and just zone out for a couple hours, because the alternative is furthering our own exhaustion when we have to deal with what we already have to deal with. It's just too much.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's as grim a scenario as that is,
and
as real as it is for everybody, not nearly as grim as being the unfortunate casualties of American foreign policy.
Yeah. Ugh. Yeah, it's horrifying. And we have these like next lines here. I drink myself to sleep because I'm losing faith that we here in the cradle of affluence can cease this sickening drive for individual strength through state powers swinging fists. And I'm just curious about what your thoughts are here on like the the reference to the cradle of affluence or anything like that stands out in this line.
Yeah, I mean, it just speaks louder to the point that the only reason why we murder civilians wholesale and is so that we can gain access to those natural resources and keep an ideological foothold in the region so that we can continue to have access to those resources. It's also that we can have wealth so that our gas is cheap. You know, I mean, people have been complaining about $5 a gallon gasoline the last like month or whatever. And it's like, man, do you know how expensive gasoline has been in Europe for years? I mean, we have cheap gasoline compared to the rest of the quote unquote developed world. And, but I mean, we want convenience and we want things to be expedient and we want things to be cheap and available to us. And, in order to have that, I mean, the toll is enormous on people who aren't us.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I remember when I lived in England in like 2010, and petrol, as it's called there, was like £1 10 pence a liter. And if you consider the the dollar to pound financial conversion, the gas in England like 12 years ago was so staggeringly high that it would just blow the minds of virtually everybody I've ever met in the United States, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's $6 a gallon or something. I don't know exactly what the
Yeah.
conversion rate was, but I mean, it's routinely around $2 a liter in Europe. The last time that I was there, and so that's like 3.7, 3.8 liters or whatever to a gallon. You do the fucking math. It's a lot more
Yeah.
expensive than $5. Just
Yeah.
people love their convenience and their gas to be cheap, because we're Americans,
Yeah.
it's part of the like post-war, and by post-war I mean post World War II economic plenty that the United States grew to take for granted.
Yeah. And we're actually kind of almost prisoners to that system in a way, because we have a country that does not value alternative forms of transportation hardly at all. So we all live in these places where the only thing that we can do to get from place to place is to drive single occupancy vehicles instead of relying on other forms of transportation, because that was what we allowed to happen. And so now we all complain about it, but it's like we allowed the system to be developed that way where there were no options other than that. So we're like prisoners as well at the same time, which is pretty wild. But, let's talk about World War II for a second here, because there's a reference in this line that I have been processing the last day because of my having grown up in Missouri, which is referenced in the next line, that will ever look back and laugh at the irony that is an atomic murderer is enshrined in Independence, USA, while 8,000 miles from here in the cradle of democracy, it's another banner year for cottage industry, a ritual at the corner of George and Constantine, as foundries scramble to recast his decapitated monument. So tell me about your thoughts here on Independence just outside of Kansas City, and what is being referenced here in this last line, because I was finding so much stuff, and it was so enjoyable to learn about this topic that's referred to in this last couple of lines.
Oh yeah, so this is my favorite line from the entire Today's Empire is Tomorrow's Ashes record.
Amazing.
This is like. I mean, this was maybe one of the first songs ever, aside from, I don't know, some esoteric Bad Religion references or something, but that like sent me into like a tailspin of Googling. And I mean, at the time, Googling was not as easy as it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's dense. So here we go. I mean, an atomic murder enshrined in Independence, USA is pretty obviously a reference to the Truman Library in Independence, Missouri. Harry Truman being the president who decided to drop Fat Man and Little Boy on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Yep.
The reason why it's ironic to enshrine him, or to, I mean, well, it's not even ironic, and that it is sort of objectively a hideous act of mass murder what occurred in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
And it was the original big time Pentagon budget drill.
Yes.
I mean, the Manhattan Project was the result of the United States throwing gargantuan amounts of money and resources towards creating weapons of war to win World War II. Now dropping the bomb, I mean, a lot of people said, oh, who knows how much longer the war would have dragged on if we didn't drop it. But we had to do it to stop the war, right? Is the casual justification by boomers and the like. But I mean, 200,000 people were like lost their lives.
Yeah.
Like as a result of this act, and like not nearly close to most of them were even combatants.
Right.
And so this is a really great example of, well, when we want we want to impose our ideological and political will, and the obstacle is people fighting for their sovereignty or whatever. I'm not by any stretch saying that Hirohito's government or Japan was great either. Doesn't mean that they deserve to have bombs dropped on them, but the United States, they'll murder people to get what they want done. And it was the first really obvious example of that. It's a fucking crazy line that, I mean, the revelation that I had, like looking everything up when I was like a kid, just being like, holy shit, it's heavy. But I mean, I'll let you, because you seem to have the notes that you sent me have a much more comprehensive description of the back half of this line.
Right. I mean, this is wild. So the ritual at the corner of George and Constantine was I had no idea what this meant. Did you happen to click that Google Maps link or whatever that I sent over to show the street view of the intersection in Athens, Greece?
Yes.
So there is this 12-foot high bronze statue of Harry Truman a few blocks from where the first Olympics was held. And I don't know have you ever been to Athens? Has Elway ever been to Athens?
No, we've never gone there before.
Well, if you ever go and you're around the Acropolis or the Temple of Zeus, be on the lookout, because you will likely go right past this thing. So there's this 12-foot high statue of Truman in Athens, and the plaque reads that he helped the Greek people to preserve their freedom and national integrity, which was built to honor the Truman for the Truman Doctrine, which provided $2 billion to the Greek government to fight off communists during the 1940s civil war within the country. And this was like crazy stuff to me. And in March of 87, the statue was bombed by what was described in the media as a leftist group in advance of a visit by Secretary of State George Shultz. And it took like a year and a half to restore it, because it was voted down to restore by the Socialist City Council, saying there was too much resentment due to the American involvement in the Greek Civil War, because we were over there, getting involved. And it was put back up in the middle of the night, which I found to be interesting, because that is what happens with controversial monuments around the world. Like they get worked on overnight, which has been the case with all of the removal of the Confederacy monuments that have been removed across the United States in the last couple of years. They seem to always go down in the middle of the night. But this statue's been toppled multiple times, including in a 2006 protest of U.S. involvement in the Middle East. So Chris talks about this, a banner year, the ritual at the corner of George and Constantine in Athens. I think, Tim, the ritual is the defacing and toppling of the Truman statue over and over and over. Does that sound like it might be what Chris is getting at here in this song to you?
That's what it always seemed to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I didn't know about the circumstances in which it was built, or that it had been toppled ever before.
Yeah.
I remember learning about at George and Constantine in Athens that there was a statue of Harry Truman. I connected the dots with his presidential library in Independence, Missouri, and I figured that the song was sort of a fiction about people cutting off its head.
Yeah.
So I never knew all of these facts of the history of the actual statue, or that there is like a rich historical tradition of knocking it the fuck over or bombing it. I mean, like that was extremely edifying to read. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. And if you look at the Google Street View of the statue right now, it has graffiti all over it in the picture that you can look at online right now. So I thought that was absolutely hilarious. But there is an article in The Atlantic that I found from December 3rd, 2013, called "The Poor, Tortured, Bombed, Painted Truman Statue in Athens." So there is there's a pretty good amount of stuff out there about this statue and its history of being graffitied. But I thought it was so satisfying to learn the story, just like you just said. I was like blown away by how specific this was. and how I've been listening to this record for over 20 years. And I learned these things yesterday. I mean, the amount of stuff that is packed into a propaganda record is just so bottomless. I mean, you just never can get to the entire story because the scope is so deep and comprehensive, and it really just continues to blow my mind. I've been doing this podcast for 2 years and it never ceases to amaze me, you know?
Oh yeah. I mean, this was a cool revelation. To know that's how deep that's how deep the research must have been just to write the song. It's why we're both here talking about an extremely esoteric band's extremely esoteric song for an hour, you know,
for a song they don't even play, you know. This is like a deep cut at this point. Like, they don't even play this one live, and it's just like, I can't believe how astonishingly perfect this song is and how it's just never played.
Yeah.
Ugh. It's so wild. Do you have any like major takeaways about, you know, this conversation or this song in general, and just kind of like what this, kind of asks you to think about as you go through the world in your life today? What are you thinking about as we bring this in for a landing?
I mean, I think the important thing to learn from this song, or the takeaway, would be that regardless of party or political affiliation in the United States, the government will continue to use people who live all over the world as a means to an end, if it means that they can get an ideological foothold in their region or plunder their natural resources. And meanwhile, they will propagandize and scare Americans into believing what we're doing is correct. And that transcends party lines. So if people in the Middle East are not being friendly with Halliburton, we'll find a way to justify intervention in their sovereignty so that we can have access to their oil and be able to supplant their democratically elected regimes and replace them with some that are friendly to us. And it's happened time and time again. It'll continue to happen again. And it is bullshit. It's tragic.
Yeah, it really is. And, here you and I are with extraordinarily small amounts of power between the two of us. And I don't know, I kind of just want to bombard my quote unquote elected officials with messages asking them how they are a part of a death machine, and the complicity that they're involved in with using our tax dollars for continuing the agenda of death and plunder around the world. And I just feel like I need to use my tiny voice to scream into the email inboxes of my senator and House of Representatives aides email inbox. And it feels so pathetic and small to even think about what I have the ability to do,
Yeah, I mean, I also would like to bombard them, though not with emails. Unfortunately, I spend enough time kneecapping myself politically, and unfortunately, this is the reality that we live in, and I don't think that I would do a whole lot if I was just going to the Home Depot to get some PVC to make some pipe bombs or something. Unfortunately, that's just not going to be the way that I express my political leanings.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I am super grateful to you for jumping back on the phone with me, coming back on the podcast after your first fantastic appearance where we went so hard on Lotus Gate. That was like an emotional experience for me. I still think back on that conversation. I'm like, that was so
We hear in the cradle. Affluence can cease. A sickening cry for individual strength through state power swinging fists that will never look back and laugh at the irony that is atomic murderers enshrined in Independence USA. Well, 8,000 miles from here, in the cradle of democracy. industry.